Locked in a cold metal cage, the German Shepherd lay motionless, his eyes dull and defeated. He was on death row in the shelter. His time-running-out days had turned into weeks, and no one had come for him. No one wanted the large, scarred dog who flinched at every sound and shied away from every hand. He had stopped barking, stopped trying to get anyone's attention. The other dogs howled and whimpered, but he lay silently, as if accepting his fate. But then something extraordinary happened, a moment so unexpected it changed everything. The shelter was eerily quiet at night, except for the occasional whimpers and soft howls of dogs longing for freedom in the far corner. Away from the main entrance, a German Shepherd named Rex lay in his cold metal cage. His large frame was curled tightly into the corner. His once proud posture now hunched and defeated the scars on his coat. Told stories of a painful past, when one that no one at the shelter truly knew, and perhaps no one cared to ask about. Rex had stopped barking weeks ago. He had learned that barking didn't matter. It didn't bring anyone to his cage. It didn't get him adopted. The visitors who came to the shelter always walked past him, their eyes lingering only briefly before they moved on to the younger, more energetic dogs. Rex wasn't the kind of dog people wanted, a large, intimidating shepherd with a history of aggression, or so his record said. The truth was, Rex wasn't aggressive. He was scared. Every raised hand reminded him of pain. Every loud noise sent shivers through his body, but no one saw that to them he was just another unadoptable dog. And now his time was almost up. That evening, as the staff cleaned up for the night, Rex watched them quietly from his cage. His eyes, once bright and alert, had grown dull. He no longer hoped for a miracle. His heart had grown heavy with the weight of waiting. Tomorrow was the day his life would end. The shelter had made the decision. There wasn't enough space, and Rex was deemed unfit for adoption as the lights dimmed and the staff left for the night. The silence grew deeper. The other dogs continued to whine and bark, but Rex didn't join them. Instead, he let out a quiet whimper, a sound so soft it was almost imperceptible. It wasn't a cry for attention, it was a cry of resignation. But somewhere in the darkness, someone heard it across town. Emily sat in her small apartment, scrolling aimlessly through her phone. She was a vet tech by trade, someone who had dedicated her life to helping animals. But lately, she had felt lost. She had always wanted to adopt a dog, but life had a way of making excuses for her. Her apartment was too small. Her hours were too long. She didn't have enough experience with challenging dogs. But that night, something pulled at her, a feeling she couldn't shake. She opened her social media feed, and there it was, a post from the local shelter. It was a grainy photo of Rex, lying in his cage, his eyes staring blankly at the camera. The caption read, "Rex, 5 years old, needs a home by tomorrow or he will be euthanized." Emily's heart sank. There was something in his eyes, something that called out to her. She couldn't explain it, but she felt an undeniable pull. She stared at the photo for a long moment, her finger hovering over the phone. "You can't save them all." She whispered to herself a phrase she'd heard too many times in her line of work, but this time the words felt hollow. Without thinking, she dialed the shelter's number. It was late and no one answered, but she left a message anyway. "Hi, my name is Emily. I saw your post about Rex. I know it's late, but I want to help. Please don't do anything until I come by tomorrow." Hanging up the phone, Emily felt a rush of emotions, fear, doubt, and a strange sense of determination. She didn't know why she felt so compelled to help this particular dog, but she couldn't ignore the feeling. She set her alarm for early morning, knowing that she had to be at the shelter as soon as it opened. Back at the shelter, Rex lay still in his cage, unaware that someone somewhere had decided to fight for him. The moonlight streamed through the small, barred window, casting a faint glow over his tired body. For the first time in weeks, Rex let out a deep sigh, as if some part of him knew that his story wasn't over yet. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink at the shelter. The staff were already beginning their routine, feeding the dogs and cleaning their cages for Rex. It was just another day in a string of monotonous, lonely days. But today something was different. Today was the day his fate would be decided. Rex sat quietly in his cage as the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. The shelter manager, a stern woman named Karen, approached his enclosure with a clipboard in hand. Her expression was one of regret, but her eyes were firm. "I'm sorry, boy," she murmured. "We tried, but no one's come for you." She moved on, but Rex didn't react. He had already accepted what was coming. His once bright spirit had dimmed, buried beneath layers of disappointment and fear. Meanwhile, Emily was already on her way, her heart pounded as she navigated the quiet streets, her mind racing with doubts. "What if he's too aggressive? What if I can't handle him?" she whispered to herself. But every time she considered turning back, the image of Rex's eyes from the shelter's post flashed in her mind. There was something about him, something she couldn't ignore, pulling into the shelter's parking lot, and Emily took a deep breath. The building was unassuming, a simple brick structure surrounded by chain-link fences. She hurried to the entrance, clutching her phone, with the shelter's post still open on the screen. Inside, Karen was reviewing Rex's file one last time when she heard the door open. She looked up, surprised to see a young woman standing in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "Hi, I'm Emily," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I called last night about Rex." Karen raised an eyebrow, glancing at the clock. "You're here early," she said, "but you're too late. He's scheduled." "Wait." Emily interrupted, her voice firm. "I'll take him." Karen paused, studying Emily's determined expression. "Are you sure Rex isn't an easy dog? He's had a rough past, and we've had issues with aggression, I'm sure," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "I know what I'm doing. Please just give me a chance." Karen hesitated, but there was something about Emily's tone that made her reconsider. With a nod, she set down the clipboard. "All right, let me take you to him." Emily followed Karen down the corridor, the sound of barking and whining growing louder with each step. The air was heavy with the smell of disinfectant and damp fur as they approached Rex's cage. Emily's heart sank. He was even more defeated in person than he had seemed in the photo. His body was curled tightly in the corner of the cage, his head resting on his paws, and his dull eyes barely acknowledged her presence. Karen opened the cage cautiously, keeping her movement slow and deliberate. "Be careful," she warned, Huns not exactly welcoming. Emily crouched down, her voice soft. "Hey, Rex," she said gently. "It's okay, boy. I'm here to take you home." At the sound of her voice, Rex lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching. He didn't move, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a spark of curiosity. Perhaps Emily extended her hand, careful not to invade his space. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." Rex hesitated, his body tense, but after a long moment, he shifted slightly, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Emily held her breath, her hands still outstretched. Slowly, cautiously, Rex moved toward her, his movements tentative and unsure. When his nose finally brushed her hand, Emily felt a surge of relief. "Good boy," she said softly, her voice breaking with emotion. "Good boy." Karen watched in silence, her usual skepticism melting into a faint smile. "You've got a lot of work ahead of you," she said, her tone lighter now, "but maybe this will work." As Emily led Rex out of the shelter, the morning sun bathed them in a warm glow. Rex's steps were hesitant, his body stiff, but he followed her willingly for the first time in months. He was leaving the confines of the shelter. For the first time in months, he had hope. The drive back to Emily's small apartment was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle from the back seat. Rex lay curled on a blanket she had placed for him, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings through the window. His body was still tense, his movements cautious, as though he couldn't quite trust what was happening. For all he knew, this could be another temporary stop, another fleeting moment before being returned to the cold metal confines of a cage. Emily kept glancing at him through the rearview mirror, her heart aching at the sight. She wanted to say something to reassure him, but she knew words wouldn't be enough. This was a dog who had learned not to hope, not to trust. It would take more than kind words to break through the walls he had built around himself. When they arrived, Emily parked in front of her apartment complex, a modest building with a small patch of grass in the front. She turned to Rex and spoke softly. "We're here, boy. This is home now." She opened the car door, carefully giving Rex a moment to adjust before extending the leash. He hesitated, his ears twitching, but eventually stepped out. His paws touched the ground as he sniffed the air. His posture still guarded, Emily led him toward the building, moving slowly so as not to startle him. Inside, the apartment was simple but cozy. A dog bed sat in the corner near the living room window, and a set of bowls with fresh water and kibble awaited Rex in the kitchen. Emily had spent the night before preparing the space, wanting to make it as welcoming as possible. But as she unclipped the leash and let Rex explore it, became clear that he wasn't ready to settle in just yet. He patted around the apartment, his nose working overtime as he inspected every corner. His movements were stiff, his body low to the ground as though expecting danger to leap out at any moment. When he reached the dog bed, he sniffed it briefly before retreating to a corner near the door, curling into a tight ball. His eyes remained fixed on Emily, watching her every move with wary curiosity. Emily sighed, her chest tightening. She had expected this. She knew it would take time. But seeing Rex so withdrawn was harder than she'd anticipated. She had crouched down, keeping her voice soft. "It's okay, Rex. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you for a moment." His eyes softened, but he didn't move. Emily decided to give him space, retreating to the kitchen to prepare dinner. She hoped the smell of food might coax him out of his shell. But when she returned with a plate for herself, Rex was still in the same spot, his head resting on his paws. Over the next few days, a delicate routine began to form. Emily gave Rex as much space as he needed, never forcing him to interact, but always letting him know she was there. She spent hours sitting quietly on the floor near his corner, reading a book or working on her laptop, allowing him to grow accustomed to her presence. Slowly, he began to relax his posture, less tense, his eyes less guarded. One evening, as Emily sat on the couch watching TV, she felt a faint pressure against her leg. She looked down and froze, her heart skipping a beat. Rex had approached her, his nose gently nudging her knee for a moment. She didn't move, afraid of scaring him away. But then she reached out slowly, her hand hovering above his head before resting gently on his fur. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Rex didn't pull away. He stood there for a few moments before retreating to his corner, but the connection had been made. It was a small step, but to Emily it felt monumental that night. As Emily lay in bed, she thought about everything Wed had endured, the scars on his body, the fear in his eyes. They all told a story of pain and survival. But beneath it all, she saw a glimmer of hope, a spark that hadn't been extinguished. She was determined to fan that spark into a flame as she drifted off to sleep. She couldn't help but feel that Rex's journey was just beginning, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The day stretched into weeks, and slowly but surely, Rex began to change. At first, it was subtle, a soft wag of his tail when Emily called his name, or the way he followed her from room to room, maintaining a cautious distance, but always keeping her in sight. Each small step felt monumental. A tiny crack in the wall he had built around himself. Emily, true to her promise, remained patient. She never forced him to interact, but she celebrated every moment of progress. When he finally lay on the dog bed she had set up for him, she nearly cried. It wasn't much, but it was proof that he was starting to trust her, starting to believe that maybe this new life wasn't so bad after all. One evening, after a long day at work, Emily decided it was time to try something new. She grabbed a leash and knelt down in front of Rex, holding it out for him to see. "What do you think, Buddy? Want to go for a walk?" Rex tilted his head, his ears perking slightly. It was the most curious expression Emily had seen from him, yet encouraged, she clipped the leash onto his collar and opened the front door. Rex hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting to her as if seeking reassurance. She gave him a gentle pat, keeping his distance, but offering a hand for Rex to sniff. Rex froze, his body stiffening, and Emily felt the tension ripple through the leash for a moment. She thought he might lunge, but instead he simply stepped back, his eyes wary but not hostile. "Good boy," she said softly. Relieved, the neighbor straightened and gave her an understanding nod. "You're doing great. It takes time, but they always come around." Emily smiled, grateful for the encouragement, as they continued their walk. Rex seemed to grow more confident. His steps became steadier, his ears more relaxed. By the time they returned home, he was walking beside her, his head held just a little higher than before that night, as Emily settled onto the couch with a cup of tea. Rex surprised her again. He walked over to her, his tail wagging ever so slightly, and rested his head on her lap. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. She set the cup aside and gently ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the warmth of his trust for the first time. "You're a good boy, Rex," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be okay." For the first time since she had brought him home, Rex seemed at peace. His eyes closed and a soft sigh escaped him as he settled into her lap. In that moment, Emily knew that the walls around his heart were finally coming down. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, a shadow from Rex's past loomed on the horizon one night. As Emily was tidying up the apartment, she noticed something strange. A car she didn't recognize was parked across the street. Its headlights off. It had been there for hours. Unmoving Max, who had been dozing near the window, suddenly stood, his ears alert. He let out a low, rumbling growl, the sound vibrating through the room. Emily's heart sank as she realized that for all their progress, Rex might not be as free from his past as she had hoped. The mysterious car stayed parked across the street for hours, its dark silhouette barely visible under the dim glow of a streetlight. Emily tried to convince herself that it was nothing, that it belonged to a neighbor or someone visiting, but the growing unease in her chest wouldn't subside. Max, however, seemed to know better. His low growl continued, his body tense, as he stood by the window staring intently at the car. "Rex," Emily whispered, crouching beside him. She gently stroked his fur, hoping to calm him. "It's okay, buddy, you're safe here." But Rex didn't relax. His growl deepened, and his eyes remained locked on the car. Emily had seen him react to strange noises or sudden movements before, but this was different. This was something deeper, something primal. She glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. Whatever was happening, she needed answers. Gathering her courage, Emily stepped outside. The cool night air sent a shiver down her spine as she approached the edge of her driveway. The car was still there, its windows tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside. "Can I help you?" She called, her voice steadied despite the fear gnawing at her for a moment. There was no response. Then the car engine roared to life, its headlights flashing on, and it sped away into the night. Emily stood, frozen, her heart pounding. As she watched the car disappear down the street, she turned back toward the house where Rex was now standing at the window, his eyes still fixed on the street. The next morning, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She called the shelter to see if they had any information about Rex's past, but the response was vague. "We don't have much on him," the manager said apologetically. "He was found as a stray, but we did hear rumors about a difficult history." "What kind of history?" Emily pressed. There was a pause on the other end of the line. We heard he might have come from a dog-fighting operation, but nothing was confirmed. Emily's stomach dropped. Dog-fighting, the thought of Rex being forced into such a cruel life, made her heart ache. It explained so much: his fear, his scars, his distrust of people. But it also meant that whoever had been involved in that operation might still be out there. And if they had found her, it wasn't a coincidence. That evening, Emily decided to take extra precautions. She locked every door and window, double-checking them before settling onto the couch. Rex stayed close to her, his usual caution replaced by a heightened alertness. He seemed to sense her unease, and his presence gave her a small sense of comfort. But as the hours ticked by, the sense of dread only grew stronger. Around midnight, Rex's ears perked up, and he let out another low growl. Emily's heart raced as she followed his gaze to the front window. The car was back this time. Emily didn't hesitate. She grabbed her phone and called the police, explaining the situation in a hushed tone. "There's a car outside my house," she said. "It's been watching us for hours. Please send."